Really appreciate everyone joining us today, and then we're going to get started. I am Elizabeth Miller. I'm the NCPC's Director of Physical Planning, and happy to be here to share a proposed new vision for Pennsylvania Avenue. While we have a great team working behind the scenes to run the show, I'd like to introduce those that will be in the meeting today. If I could ask them to turn on their camera, and I would like to introduce, Karen Sherhold, who is the Pennsylvania Avenue's Initiatives Project Manager, as well as Megan Dowker, our Senior Planner, and Jeff Jamawat, who is one of our Project Urban Planners. And before we dive into the presentation, I'd like to share some important information and cover some logistics. So NCPC kicked off a 120-day public comment period for the initiative in March. The comment period does go through middle of July, closes on July 13th. This is the first of 3 public meetings. Each meeting will be of the same format and will cover the same information. The purpose of these meetings is to share the proposed vision and concepts and answer your questions so that you can then take some time to assess the ideas, provide your comments, and share your input back with us. You can submit comments on Pennsylvania Avenue's initiative project page on NCPC's website, and we'll provide more information at the end of the presentation on how you can access this information. During the presentation, we're going to pause twice for a couple of minutes to post a poll that we'd ask you to answer and to give you time to put your thoughts together and start to type in some of your initial questions. We're not using the chat or hand raise feature today, so please use the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen. You can enter your questions at any time during the presentation. Megan and Jeff will be moderating your questions, and Karen and I will answer them at the end of the presentation. And we will use this public input to help inform and advance our future work. So, as I said, we are excited to share this new vision and concepts, which stem from a tremendous collaboration among federal and district agencies who are stewards of the street. We have a 4-part agenda. I'll be covering some background information for context, and we'll introduce the vision. And then Karen's going to give an overview of the conceptual approaches to achieve the vision. I will then wrap up to overview our next steps, and then Karen and I will then take your questions. So laid out in the L'Enfant plan to serve as the People's Promenade, over time, the Avenue has become an important civic space representative of a democracy that belongs to all Americans. And President Washington considered the Avenue to be one of the capital city's most important features. The Avenue has cycled through decline and renewal for more than 230 years, reinventing itself to meet the needs of each era. In 1853, the Avenue was actually envisioned to be a grand promenade, as shown here. And throughout the late 1800s and early 1900s, it became the district's bustling commercial corridor. And in the late 1930s, it started to transition to primarily an office district, and the car started to dominate the landscape. Incremental land use, physical and economic changes over the past 3 decades have impacted the use and function of the Avenue, which actually has become a detriment to downtown's vitality. As you know, the roadway is very wide with very few cars, and there's very little street activity. And the Avenue was, as the nation's most iconic street, is no longer the destination it once was. And this was occurring even prior to the pandemic. There is a long history of planning for the Avenue. The most recent renewal began in 1972 when Congress created and charged the Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation, which you will hear us refer to as the PADC. Congress charged the PADC to develop, operate, maintain, and program the street. However, in 1996, the PADC was dissolved, and Congress delegated its responsibilities to both district and federal agencies. And then we were charged to ensure that the Avenue was maintained commensurate with its civic role in the nation's capital. Shown here is the 1974 PADC plan, which guided development of the Avenue as we know today. It is still the guiding plan, and it's almost a half a century old, and it's past due for an update. After PADC was dissolved, there was no singular entity to advocate for the avenue as a whole. So the agencies shown here partnered to launch the Pennsylvania Avenue Initiative that we're here to talk about today. The blue boundary represents the area of the 1974 plan that I just mentioned, and our focus has expanded a bit and is shown here in orange. It's 1.2 miles across 12 city blocks that includes about 40 acres of public space. So after years of deferred maintenance, the avenue's infrastructure is starting to age and its physical condition is declining. The most significant impact is that the street is no longer a crosstown thoroughfare. It doesn't carry the crosstown traffic it once did. White House security and permanent street closures have rerouted vehicular and pedestrian traffic, severing this important east-west thoroughfare. The avenue is no longer meeting today's needs, and even before the loss of office workers and tourism during the pandemic. We completed several studies to assess the avenue's condition. There are two key findings that I'd like to point out this afternoon, that actually lead to the importance of reprioritizing how we use the street and revive downtown's economy. First, that there's too many travel lanes, which present an opportunity to reallocate space to other uses. And second, the street doesn't have the characteristics to sustain viable retail. And this has only been compounded during the pandemic. In 2020, the district tapped the Urban Land Institute to examine how the city could recover from the impacts of the pandemic. The report focused on the importance of using public space, placemaking, design, and civic infrastructure to revitalize downtown. And these recommendations actually directly align with our goals of the initiative. We asked 6 experts from the land development and economic disciplines to review these studies and give us their input. They started to push us to think about what the avenue is and what it is not. They talked about it being more than just a beautiful street. And their advice was not to reinvent the avenue, but to embrace its attributes and advise that its best role is a curated corridor. It should be a place designed for people first and elevated as America's stage for nationally significant events. They suggested 3 core building blocks. One is to enhance programming and add flexible infrastructure so that we can make this a dedicated location for nationally significant events. 2 is to capitalize on the avenue's attributes by elevating the experience of the Capitol Vista and enhancing the public realm for events and daily use. And 3rd is to improve connectivity to and among the public spaces so that they engage their adjoining buildings and can strengthen the open space network. They suggest celebrating the avenue's civic role and spirit of democracy by creating an inspiring public realm and modernizing its infrastructure to make the avenue a great street and the iconic destination that it should be. So we are envisioning the street as a venue and as a street for people. Today, we'll share how the street can become a better place for people and how we can revive the avenue to be that inclusive venue and an iconic and inviting and resilient public space. I like this quote by Helen Marriage, one of our subject matter experts, and I think she said it well. The avenue should be a place for ambitious, ephemeral events that live in our memory, transforming lives by the way we see the world. So we're envisioning the avenue as a signature venue for spectacular events, a place where we all are welcome, uplifted, and inspired. This is an example of a storybook event that took place in London in 2026. We can scale up the quality of programming to showcase the best of American art, culture, and entertainment, a place where we can bring all people together to celebrate our past, aspire to our future, and expand our imagination. The avenue can become a new home for many large events. Excuse me. I'm hoping I just had a little accident in the background. The avenue can become a better home for many large events that already take place on the National Mall. These events can elevate the avenue's visibility as a place to tell our story, celebrate, commemorate, and just have some fun. This will also help to relieve pressure to overuse the National Mall. The Avenue can also offer comfortable and amazing public spaces to attract people back downtown for us to enjoy every day, all day, and into the evening. This is becoming increasingly important as we are looking for a reason to get out of the house and our workplaces to meet up and engage with others. And as I said before, the Avenue needs to be a street for people. We can reallocate space within the right-of-way to offer better transportation options for pedestrians, bicycles, transit, and devote a little less space to cars. And as many know, the Avenue has a long tradition of hosting social, cultural, and political moments and events. It's held us as we've mourned, protested inequalities, witnessed the tug and pull of our democracy, and rejoice in our most important achievements. And we're fortunate. The Avenue is an ideal place for public gatherings, and it can't be replicated anywhere in the city or nation. Most notably, the Avenue's urban form and its character is unsurpassed. Its iconic vista, monumental scale, generously paved areas, and the sequence of public spaces offer multiple settings for activities large and small. And its location is unique, an inherently symbolic place close to both downtown and the National Mall. And its use mix is conducive for events as it has low traffic volumes and great access to public transit. The predominant office use means that the Avenue is least populated during typical event times, and downtown businesses and nearby cultural uses can surely benefit from the visitor traffic that these events can bring. So while pre-pandemic, the Avenue hosted about 150 local and regional events each year, we believe that we can supplement these events by scaling up the programming to attract audiences from near and far. These events can increase tourism, contribute to the local economy, and raise the visibility of the city on both the national and international stage. And we can expand programming opportunities to celebrate culture and provide more opportunities to recapture the street for people 18 hours a day, all year long. The Avenue can still host First Amendment activities, local events, and be available for everyday use. But what we need is the right infrastructure improvements so that the Avenue can become a better venue for all of these activities. And COVID has revealed that the demand for civic infrastructure and high quality outdoor public space is more important than ever. The vision of the Avenue as a venue aligns with the district's effort to bring people back downtown and revive the economy. Now is the time to think about redevelopment strategies for the Avenue as civic investments that can drive economic revitalization, much like investing in a waterfront or a new convention center. In the same way that we're rethinking the future workplace and office to residential conversions, for example, we also need to rethink how the Avenue is used and how this public space can play a vital role in the district's recovery. To design the street for people, we need to right-size the road to match today's needs, freeing up space for other uses and prioritizing people over cars. We have prepared 3 concepts that begin to explore different ways to realign circulation, configure public space, and offer different options to balance daily use of the street with event programming. So before I turn it over to Karen to share the 3 concepts, we're going to pause here for a couple of minutes. We have 2 polls, each with 2 questions about how often you visit the Avenue. So if you could, and while you're taking this, after we review the results, we're going to give you some time to gather your thoughts about any questions you may have. So Paul, based on the input that you're getting, I'll let you decide when to share these results.
I'll share them now.
Okay, great. So the question is, prior to the pandemic, how often did you come to Pennsylvania Avenue? And we have 29% of our audience today said they came on a daily basis, and another 29% said they come at least once a month. 24% of you come at least once a week, and 18% at least once a year, and 4% rarely or not much at all. So I'll now ask Paul to share the second poll.
Okay, Beth.
Okay, so the second, I'm sorry, the poll number 3, but the second poll of this section. And I'm just going to ask, is that being, can everyone see that?
Yes, we can see the poll.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to share the results.
Good, thank you. So the first question is, since the pandemic, how often do you come to Pennsylvania Avenue? 29% said they have visited the Avenue at least once a month, 20% at least once a week, 14% at least once a year, 10% daily, and then 27% since the pandemic have rarely or not visited the Avenue. And the second question is, since the pandemic, what did you typically do when you did visit the Avenue? 37% said that they enjoyed the public spaces, 29% dining and entertainment, and I missed the 67% who bike or walk, 24% of you attended special events, and 16% of you actually work near or on the Avenue. So really appreciate you participating in that poll. It's always interesting to see how our life has changed and what we might have been doing pre and post or pre-pandemic and since the pandemic began. Hopefully it's going to be in our rearview mirror very soon. So with that, we'll have Karen talk about the concepts.
Great, thank you, Beth. So the ideas we're going to share are really intended to inspire and to get us thinking about what may be possible for the Avenue. We're excited to share 3 concepts that support this new vision. They all introduce ideas to enhance the physical space, engage visitors, support events, and achieve sustainability goals, uniquely prioritizing pedestrians, vehicles, daily use, and programming opportunities so that the Avenue functions as a street and as a venue. They're also not standalone options, so components of each concept can be mixed and matched depending on the needs of the Avenue. So first, I'll introduce the guiding themes for each concept. Over here on the left, we have Urban Capital Street, proposing a downtown destination with expansive sidewalks, comfort amenities, and services. Linear Green proposes a car-free urban linear park that prioritizes transit, people, and bikes. And Civic Stage proposes a large promenade on center with a Capitol Vista with ample flexible spaces for daily activity and special events. I'm going to grab my pointer here. So we'll look at the components of the Avenue. As Beth mentioned, one of the key findings that came out of our research and analysis is that we can reallocate about 20 feet of roadway space for other uses. That's about 2 travel lanes. So these cross sections compare how each concept uses that extra 20 feet, and they each rethink how we can accommodate pedestrians, bikes, transit, and cars. So this top illustration is the Avenue today. You can see a lot of space for vehicles with that center running bike lane. Here with Urban Capital, it's very close to the existing condition, but it takes that surplus roadway and expands the sidewalk, giving more room for pedestrians with dedicated lanes for cars, transit, and bikes. In the center, we have linear green, which is a car-free concept. It uses the surplus roadway to transform the sidewalk area into a curbless pedestrian park with transit and bike lanes in the center. And then on the right, we have civic stage, which uses that surplus to create a grand central promenade running the length of the avenue with bike and travel lanes on each side. So this shows out how those configurations play out along the avenue's corridor. The aerials at the bottom show the big opportunities, while the smaller images at the top represent a street level view to give a sense of the character of the space. So throughout the presentation, we'll look at all three concepts together using a consistent order and this color coding throughout the, so it's easy to compare. So again, we'll start with the urban capital on the left. The expanded sidewalks here provide room for unique and varied pedestrian pockets. These are places for activity and potentially mobile commerce. In the center, linear green, the pedestrian paths weave through the linear park landscape, creating informal areas for seating and recreation. And then on the right, civic stage creates that new pedestrian space in the center where people can enjoy a grand promenade with capitol views that again extends the length of the avenue. Just want to mention, we have the inaugural parade every 4 years. This is a very tightly planned event, and we've ensured that each concept can accommodate the clear zone and the other requirements for that parade. As we mentioned before, while the avenue is not a city thoroughfare, it is a space for civic activity. The street and its series of plazas and parks often function as a stage for democracy and celebration. L'Enfant's plan for the avenue included a sequence of prominent public spaces linked by this cohesive streetscape. These spaces are where blocks of buildings frame outdoor urban rooms, which we've shown here in blue. They each have their own character and unique setting, and as we walk through, we'll refer to these areas as the western end, Market Square, and the eastern end. Each theme treats the corridor and each of the avenue's public spaces differently, and the next series of slides highlights these differences. So we'll take a little tour. For each of these urban rooms, we'll look at some event inspiration, and then I'll describe how the concepts work on a day-to-day basis. We'll go down the avenue from west to east, starting here at the western end, where we'll look at how this area could become a new civic destination. So to start, we'll imagine how the space can accommodate a big event. For a quick orientation, here we're looking southwest. The White House and President's Park are over here, the top right, the Wilson Building, Reagan Building, and National Theater around what is now Freedom Plaza. So this is really an example of how something like an International Flower Festival or other multi-day linear event could work. We can configure the plaza to expand the event space to the adjacent buildings, and by temporarily rerouting traffic, as shown here in gray, we could also further extend the activity down the avenue and into Wilson Plaza. This is an example of a lunchtime performance or a market space in front of our city hall. In this example, taking Freedom Plaza and creating a curbless event space that could expand from building face to building face increases its flexibility to accommodate both small and large events. So now we'll take a closer look at kind of the day-to-day conditions, how cars, transit, and bikes move through the area, and then some opportunities to enhance the public space. So here on the left, Urban Capital reestablishes the avenue's historic alignment, bringing travel and bike lanes diagonally through the space with a curbless roadway. This creates two bow tie plazas, a dedicated open space for the National Theater, and a new City Hall Plaza for the Wilson Building. Here in the center, linear green, keeping that plaza footprint intact, moves transit and bikes to the south. This creates a park in front of the National Theater that begins a landscape sequence that extends down to the Capitol. And over here with Civic Stage, moves the travel lanes to the north. This connects the plaza to the blocks to the south, creating a gracious plaza for the Wilson Building and also a more prominent entry for the White House Visitor Center. The next we'll move to the center of the avenue at Market Square, and we'll look at how this area combines with the rest of the avenue to really become the new heart of the neighborhood. So for orientation, we're looking slightly northeast here. The Portrait Gallery is up at the top and the National Archives is at the bottom. So first we'll imagine an elegant outdoor dining event. This could be part of a multi-day food festival or a weekend community celebration. Here, temporary closures both along the avenue and along 8th Street create a cohesive event space with a stunning backdrop of views of the National Archives, Portrait Gallery, and the Capitol. So here's another option, a little bit less formal, maybe an after hours glow in the dark Frisbee tournament or a movie night on the lawn. Closing the avenue here to traffic could create a central park space. We could also extend that event space up Indiana Avenue to create a unique setting for leisure and recreation. Again, we'll look at the day-to-day conditions and different ways the Market Square area supports daily use and how those spaces on either side of the avenue can connect and also expand to really become the heart of the neighborhood. So we range from Urban Capital here, proposing a simple mid-block pedestrian crossing to improve pedestrian quality, to Linear Green, where closing this block and rerouting transit around it could create that permanent space for an active urban park. And finally, Civic Stage, where an expanded pedestrian crossing can join with that center promenade to create a new central square. So next we'll move along to the eastern end. This is where Pennsylvania, Constitution, and 4th Street intersect. And we'll look at how the eastern end can really become a memorable setting for both daily life and spectacular events. Here we're looking north and slightly west. National Galleries of Art are the bottom here. John Marshall Park is at the top, and Market Square, where we just were, this is up here to the left. So imagine the downtown holiday market scaled up to be a winter festival, complete with the best of winter sports, skiing, skating, hockey, and curling. Here we imagine straightening Constitution Avenue's alignment and adding a permanent closure at 4th Street, creating a big main area, and starting point and stage location for larger events to expand down the avenues and also into the adjacent public spaces. And of course, the avenue will always be our place to collectively gather. In this example, we show a tunneled Constitution Avenue running under Pennsylvania Avenue to allow for some east-west traffic flow to continue. And this also creates an expansive plaza and dedicated stage location, a place that would be easy to set up for large events and also tear down after they're over. So here we look at how this area works as a street and a setting for daily life. All the configurations here kind of start to reimagine the intersection with Constitution Avenue and with 4th Street. So again, from the left, Urban Capital really keeps the existing intersection alignment, but adds a generous pedestrian crossing at the 4th Street intersection to improve that area's walkability and strengthen the connections between the National Mall and downtown. Linear Green straightens the intersection with Constitution in Pennsylvania and closes 4th Street to make pedestrian connections along both avenues more cohesive and provide an active urban park space between the galleries. And finally, Civic Stage, this is that big idea. We're tunneling Constitution Avenue, combining with a closure at 4th Street to really create a seamless walk along the avenue and also over to the mall. So while our work focuses on the avenue west of 3rd Street, the avenue in reality does extend east to the Capitol grounds where it currently terminates into a parking lot. So here we'll imagine extending the avenue experience to be a better gateway to the Capitol. So I will add, this is not part of our study area, but we felt it was important to envision how the avenue makes this transition. Each of the concepts reduces parking and imagines a new arrival experience. So on the left, Urban Capital replaces angled parking in the center of the street with a landscape median, keeping some parking along the curbs, but really creating a more welcoming entry to the Capitol. In the center, Linear Green, this is again our car-free option, removes all parking from the avenue, transforming the street into a garden gateway in a high-performing landscape. And on the right, Civic Stage keeps some of the parking along the curbs, but extends the center promenade to the Peace Monument, creating a more ceremonial entrance to the Capitol grounds. And finally, while the urban rooms provide areas for both small and large events, they could also combine with the corridor to create really a mile-long venue space. So this idea is aimed at events that have a longer duration or a heavy footprint, like the Folklife Festival or a scaled-up seasonal market. In this example, Civic Stage's Central Promenade provides that space for festival structures and visitors in the median, potentially allowing some of the travel lanes to remain open or be used for additional programming support, which could be an advantage for larger events and an opportunity to relieve some pressure on the National Mall. So that concludes our quick tour of the three concepts. And as you can see, these are ideas. Some are modest, some are really ambitious. And we want to put these out there for conversation. We're looking at ways to help achieve this vision. We understand this is a lot of information. It's really meant to be a comparative and inspirational overview. And also, again, while they're unique concepts, they're not standalone ideas. So components from each can be mixed and matched depending on the needs of the avenue. And that's definitely something we're looking for feedback on. So before Beth wraps up with the next steps, we're going to pause for another poll. And you are welcome to also start using the Q&A feature and put down your thoughts that we'll get to at the end of the presentation.
That's a minute. I'll share the results.
Great. Okay, so it looks like the majority for the question, what would you like to see improved? More green space at 68%, and then close second, more comfortable pedestrian spaces and amenities, followed by more usable and flexible spaces for special events, and also better ways to travel along the corridor. And for which concept do you like most? Linear green at 46%, civic stage with 12, but really some aspects of each concept coming in strong at 39%, and 2% of you like the avenue as it is today. So I'm going to turn it back over to Beth, and she will tell us what's next.
Great, thank you, Karen. So as I mentioned a little earlier, the guiding plan for the avenue is almost 50 years old, and it's not meeting today's needs along the corridor. And there have been changes that have altered the use of the street and have become a detriment to the avenue's vitality. And this has really underscored the demand for civic infrastructure and high quality outdoor public space. The vision of the avenue and event as a venue aligns with the district's efforts to bring people back downtown and revive its economy. So how do we make this happen? Federal and local agencies agree it's time we look forward to the next 30 years. A new vision and a new plan is needed to give us a roadmap to guide the avenue's revitalization. We will use public input and our input from our stakeholders to prepare a preferred concept before continuing with design development. There will be ample opportunity throughout the design process for public input during each future phase of work. Ultimately, our objective is to develop a new plan that will provide this blueprint to modernize the avenue's infrastructure and improve its physical condition, as well as establish a more effective governance structure, simplify the regulatory framework, and of course, any good plan needs a good phasing and funding implementation plan. So preparing this plan will take time, money, and will. However, while we work towards developing this new plan for a larger vision, there are things that we can do now to begin making incremental improvements. So federal and district agencies are in early discussions about near and midterm actions to test and implement interim improvements that can show some quick returns with modest investment. We have important events on the horizon, like the 2025 Inaugural Parade, as well as the country's 250th anniversary. Both offer opportunities and an incentive to start planning now. In the near term, we'd like to use pilot projects to test some of these ideas before we invest in long-term improvements. And in the midterm, we want to improve event-related infrastructure, such as telecom, power, and water, and possibly security to help manage First Amendment activities and better support these upcoming celebrations and events. Over the long term, the avenue is actually designed as such that we can phase implementation of physical changes over time. Physical spaces or the corridor itself can essentially be implemented in any order according to priority and need. So this concludes our presentation. As Karen said, it's a lot of information to digest. And so before we take questions, I just want to quickly review where you can actually go to find more information and spend some more time at your leisure reviewing the vision and concepts. So this is on NCPC's website at ncpc.gov. Here at the bottom of the screen, you'll see several links. The first link will take you to the main Pennsylvania Avenue project page. And here you can find background information, links to technical studies and previous public forums. You can, at the second link, which will take you to our story map and comment portal. The tab that links to the story map is shown here in blue. This provides a narrated tour of the avenue and the easiest way to view the vision and concepts. The red arrow points to the location where you can submit your comments on our webpage. You can also submit your comments via a letter emailed to info@ncpc.gov. We encourage you to provide us with your input and feedback. We want to hear your thoughts about how to strike the right balance between events and daily use while maintaining the symbolic and important historic character of this great street. And just to conclude, so that you know, our next public meeting is scheduled for April 26th at 7 p.m. And our third meeting will be on Saturday, May 21st at 10 a.m. You're welcome to join us in any of these future meetings. And so with that, let's start taking some of your questions.
So we've had quite a few questions come streaming in, and I think maybe if we could start off with a general time frame question. So Beth, could you elaborate a little bit about the status of the vision and concepts and the overall plan and the next steps? And what is the development time frame?
Great, all good questions. So as I mentioned, we're in a 120-day public comment period that will end July 13th. And it's during this period we're collecting good public input that's going to inform our future steps. Right at this moment, there is not an exact timeline for when we will begin developing those next concepts. We're in early discussions with federal and district agencies on the necessary funding and process and timeline to do that. So we will have more information on that and as we proceed, and particularly after we get input on kind of where we think that the concept development may go. So I just want to reiterate that this is a very important time to give input at this very early stage of visioning, which is going to help define the future phases of concept development. But I also want to mention that I mentioned two kind of interim steps that we're going to be taking. The pilot project is something we would like to see perhaps tested before the inaugural, which will be in the next couple of years, and even perhaps another test soon after the inaugural. During that time, we're going to be working with some of our key stakeholders on what type of infrastructures may and be needed to modernize the telecom, power, and water hookups. And that is more of a midterm goal, which would be sometime after the inaugural, 4 or 5, maybe a little bit longer years away. That there is a process of deciding, basically programming those needs and then designing, and then at that point in time, funding and implementing. So that way, that will take a little bit of time. And then just to kind of go back to the concepts, once we know kind of what that preferred concept might look like and how these different ideas might be mixed and matched, we'll then be able to better define the design, development, and implementation timeline.
Thank you. And while you're talking about process, can you speak briefly about how the White House has been involved or their input?
Yes, we have actually been briefing many of the stakeholders, all federal and district stakeholders along the avenue throughout this process. We've also reached out to other important stakeholders like the security agencies, emergency management, et cetera. So the White House, particularly the National Park Service and the U.S. Secret Service, have been engaged in some of our initial discussions.
Great. Now that we've addressed some of the timeline questions, I think we'll transition to the topic of transportation. So there are various questions from Garrett and others. If you could share a little bit more detail about the traffic analysis that was done, and specifically losing that 20 feet of roadway. And any remarks you could make about the average daily vehicle counts as well as bus and bike counts.
Karen, do you want to?
Sure, yeah, I can address that. So as part of our background research that went into this work, there was a transportation study. It was done in 2018 with the Department of Transportation, and that the entire study is available on our website. So off the top of my head, I don't have exact count numbers, but the key conclusion that came out of that was that in 2018, we could lose about 20 feet of travel lanes. And you know what, I'm going to pull up these sections because it might be handy to look at here. So they concluded that we could eliminate 20 feet of travel space, vehicular travel space, without impacting the current level of service. So basically the road is a little bit bigger than it needs to be for the amount of traffic flow. Again, that was a 2018 study, and the pandemic has really shifted a lot of the way we use our streets downtown. Any future work as these concepts move forward, there would need to be another transportation study. So we'll definitely be getting updated analysis, but basically the existing condition here, there's 4 lanes in either direction, and each of these concepts explore cutting the travel space by 20 feet. So again, Urban Capital kind of puts that space in the sidewalks. Linear green starts to blend the sidewalks with transit and pedestrian space, and then Civic Stage puts that extra space in the center median. And each of the concepts for modes of travel considers, we know it's a heavily used transit corridor, especially with buses. So Urban Capital and Linear Green have dedicated lanes for bus transit. Civic Stage also has lanes for buses, although not dedicated. And other modes too, bicycles, scooters. We're trying to consider all of it. We know that there are regional buses that use this corridor. So it's definitely, that's all recorded in the transportation study, and also our urban design analysis did a lot of work to kind of understand where those existing bus lines are and other transit destinations along the avenue.
Thank you, Karen. I'm seeing some comments just supporting the robust bike ped infrastructure as well as civic spaces. There's a question here about whether light rail was considered as part of the transportation scheme.
Not yet, but these are ideas, and that's really the kind of feedback we're looking for.
So I think we'll transition topics here and maybe talk about public spaces. So Santiago asks, well, I think he has a comment here that linear green is the best use of the space. And it also helps with transit opportunities. The question here, is there any consideration for skateboarders, areas where skateboarders could continue to use park?
So I'll start that
Sure.
off. So we, again, these concepts are very early ideas, and we have definitely been hearing from the skateboarding community about the importance of that activity, particularly at Freedom Plaza, where they've been skating for quite some number of years. None of these actually necessarily preclude any ideas, but our primary objective is to how can we better align the road, improve the travel conditions, and and reallocate space for the use of people, but also accommodate many different users. So we definitely are considering all possibilities with the input that we're getting.
Great, thank you. And I think we'll shift again to broadly talk about cultural implications. So can you talk a little bit about the goals to revitalize economy and culture? And specifically, how will some of our landmarks like Freedom Plaza either be retained or changed? And how generally will historic landmarks be treated in the plans?
Okay, I'll start this, Karen, and if there's anything you want to add, please jump in. So I'm going to start. I may ask. There's a lot of information in those questions. So I'm going to start at the back part. Is that Pennsylvania Avenue is an historic avenue. It's part of an historic plan within the city. So the cultural landscape is very important. One of the studies that you can find on our website is a cultural landscape report, which talks about some of these things that you bring up. So whatever we consider is going to have to think about how we impact those potentially impact those historic resources, and how we minimize any impacts, and in some cases avoid impacts. So I think that is kind of the foundation of what we're thinking. And I should also mention, for those of you that are familiar with the development process, there will be, a 106 process that will take a hard look at this as we move forward with future concepts and design development. Regarding some of the landmarks, I know, for example, there is a time capsule at Freedom Plaza that was put in, I think, in the late 80s in conjunction and basically related to Martin Luther King and some of the work that he did nearby at the Willard when he wrote when he finished up his speech, his I Have a Dream speech. If Freedom Plaza changes, any potential change, or well, I should say potential change, will actually ensure that time capsule has a place in that location. So did I miss anything, Megan? What other?
Maybe if you could talk a little bit about economic stimulation and events. There are currently a lot of events happening in Freedom Plaza today. So how will the plans impact events, programming, and the downtown economy?
Well, actually, that's one major objective of the initiative itself, is to supplement. Right now, we have about 150 events, or at least pre-pandemic, there was about 150 events that were taking place on the Avenue each year, primarily of a local and regional nature. The idea is to allow those events to continue, but also to look at how we can make the public spaces more usable and more flexible to be able to scale up some of those events to more of a national interest, and how they might actually help bring in visitors and tourism, as well as provide, amenity to the locals and those in the region. So, and that's very much tied to the district's economic recovery. As the district looks to recover from the pandemic. We're working with them closely on how we can bring more people back downtown, how we can attract more people back downtown, not only to work, to live, but to visit. And events are a big part of that equation.
Great, thank you. Now that we've addressed some kind of topical related questions, we'll get into more specific ones. So this is from Antonio, who's a downtown resident. He says, from what I've heard from neighbors, linear green and civic stage are the most popular. One concern is the Constitution Avenue tunnel. We support it, but the Federal Triangle intersection has a long history of flooding. And this is a growing concern with climate change. What sort of flooding prevention measures have you looked at?
Karen, do you want to address the tunnel?
Sure. So the tunnel is really probably tips the scale on the ambitious side of things. And it's definitely an idea we want to explore. We understand that there's a lot of challenges related to it. Flooding is a concern. NCPC has done a lot of work related to Federal Triangle flooding. We're aware of the current risks, and each of these concepts really has the intention of integrating good stormwater management practices. Obviously, linear green is one that really daylights that and puts it at the front. But all of the concepts will aim to really be the best examples of good stormwater management practices. Again, the tunnel is not without its challenges. It really is almost a conversation starter to think of ways how a tunnel may improve the above ground space. But yes, we do recognize that stormwater, other infrastructure below the street, there's lots of challenges with the tunnel.
Great. While we're talking about stormwater, can you talk a little bit about how the plans address things like permeable pavement or bioretention planters?
Sure. So again, these are so early in they're really just concept ideas at this point. As these concepts start to develop and as we get public feedback that kind of shapes the direction that things will go, we will be looking to those best practices, current technology. This could be years down the road. Linear green, again, is really that concept that makes sustainable infrastructure a showcase. It's also something that when we've looked at precedents from around the world, around the country, really in terms of other infrastructure improvements, we've looked at other ways sustainable infrastructure can be integrated with kind of pedestrian hardening, whether that's a planter that can be moved with utilities or things like that. We've looked at some interesting precedents to kind of start to integrate these things, and that's something that will be on our minds as we look at maybe some of that midterm infrastructure upgrading. But again, these are very early on, and as feedback comes in and the concepts kind of gel into one direction, we'll be looking to incorporate the most sustainable practices we can.
Great, thank you, Karen. Let's see, another question here from a district resident, from Michael. So regarding the plans, it appears that all will be drawing more visitors to the avenue and surrounding area. Is the commission planning to address safety, security, restrooms, trash, etc.?
I'll take the first at that. Definitely. And with tourism, but also to accommodate those things for both the residents of downtown and the locals and those in the region that visit. So security is definitely forefront in our mind, not only how we protect buildings, but how we protect public spaces, which is something else that our agency is very focused on addressing. And we hope to use some of the research and precedents coming out of other divisions in our agency to help inform the work that we'll do regarding security. And there was another point of that. Was it security?
Things like amenities,
restrooms,
restrooms, trash facility.
again, as Karen mentioned, all of those are very important pieces of a program that will be considered, but we're kind of at a little bit more of a bird's eye level right now, looking at just kind of the big ideas to get a sense and to kind of see where these ideas might start to congeal, I should say, and start to inform sort of a preferred direction for the avenue. But we've definitely heard restrooms are something that people want to see. We've also heard about maybe places to be able to get a cup of coffee or some maybe mobile retail, temporary retail that can change and provide amenities for the workers when they're there during the week, and that might change over and provide a different amenity for the visitors that come in the evenings and on weekends.
Great. So there's a comment here from Ronald. NPS has not maintained the Avenue public spaces in the past. Are there plans to maintain the Avenue as a venue, which sounds like it would be even more maintenance intensive?
I'm going to apologize. There's some pop-ups going on my computer. Can you repeat that question?
Sure. This question is from Ronald.
Okay.
NPS has failed to maintain the Avenue public spaces in the past. Are there plans to maintain the Avenue as a venue, which sounds like it would be even more maintenance intensive?
Very good question. And that is an integral part of an update to the master plan that I referred to. As the concept starts to take form, we'll be working very closely with stakeholders to determine not only how these events might be operated, but how we maintain the avenue so that it accommodates those events, but also is a nice, enjoyable, clean and safe place for those to enjoy to enjoy every day, all day. So that's part of that implementation and funding plan that I mentioned.
Great, thank you. So I think we'll talk a little bit more about those big picture kind of project and process ideas. So this is a question from Santiago. Will funding for the project be dependent on congressional appropriation, or would DC pay for the changes?
A good question. And again, as we start to formulate the concept and the direction this will go, we'll then start to understand the amount of change, as Karen mentioned and demonstrated in her presentation. Some of these ideas are very modest and can be done, it'd be less expensive. Others are more ambitious and would cost a great deal. So once we start to know the direction of the concept, we can then start putting and estimating a dollar value, which might actually influence, some of the final decisions as well. And I would anticipate we have not gotten to that funding piece yet because we don't know exactly who all the beneficiaries are going to be, but it will likely be some type of a federal local partnership.
Great, thank you for talking about big picture project and process. Maybe now we can shift our focus back a little bit to some of the details of transportation. I'm seeing some comments here. Maybe this is more of a comment and reminder about Vision Zero, that should be carefully considered, the district's initiative to end traffic deaths. Along those lines, there's another transportation related question about, let me see if I can find it here, about bicycle lanes. How would bike lanes be incorporated in the plan? And are there any plans to add artistic structures to the corridor?
Karen, you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, and I'm gonna just pull up those sections again because I always find it's a little helpful to have a graphic. So first, Vision Zero, yes, very much something that we are aware of and want to help support in any way we can. That is definitely something that we've looked at with all of these concepts. We've consulted, engaged with DDOT and their bike and ped team in the early stages. And, you know, a lot of what you see here, again, there are these high level ideas that we're putting out there for conversation. But there was a lot of analysis and research that went into this. So, and as we've mentioned, as things move forward and sort of gel into one concept or one direction, we'll be, you know, looking again at a new transportation study, really consulting the experts on bicycles, pedestrians, getting all that feedback to make sure that this is a very safe street for people. Each of these concepts has protected bike lanes, either with a grade change or some sort of a curb situation. Again, these are details we've imagined, but since these are still concepts, it's hard to, we're not really trying to get into the details so much, but each concept does have separated bike facilities. The bus lanes, we have talked to DDOT about kind of the intersection between bikes and buses, and we're aware of some of the challenges that poses. Again, this is something that will come up much later down the road as we get into like actual design. But we are aware that the corridor is heavily used by buses, the 30s. I take the 30s sometimes, and it is a very popular route. And I did see the question about kind of the connections towards 7 and 8, and that's very important. We actually did, you know, draw out how the Pennsylvania Avenue is a key component of the 30 bus line that goes from, I think, Naylor Road up to Tenleytown. So that's something that we are very supportive in maintaining that connection, enhancing that connection, because obviously a lot of people depend on those routes. Megan, is there anything
Karen,
else?
I think that was something I was hoping you could drill in on a little bit more. There was a comment from Travis about the bus lanes that use the Pennsylvania Avenue corridor, specifically connecting to wards 7 and 8, connecting those wards to downtown. He notes that DDOT is currently working towards adding bus lanes on the Penn Ave Southeast corridor between the Library of Congress and the Anacostia River. And that bus lanes on the avenue could be great for commuters. So are there talks about using a north-south street to connect these two bus lines?
Again, down the road, I think as we actually start to gel with one concept that we want to move forward with, we'll kind of hash out the details of how that system connects. We are informed and engaged with the DC Office of Planning and their plans for Pennsylvania Avenue Southeast, and also the Golden Triangle bid as their work for Pennsylvania Avenue west of the White House continues. And we understand that, I mean, it's a small section of a street. While our focus is between the White House and the Capitol, it really extends and also connects with all of DC's wards. So that's very important to us, and it's something that a future transportation study will address, and also our future design will consider as well.
Great. I just want to thank Reese for the comments regarding Freedom Plaza. I was trying to touch on those under the cultural landmarks section. I just wanted to circle back to one comment regarding that. There is some concern about lowering the level of the plaza, and that might take away from some visibility to some of the events and programming there. So how are you thinking about topographic changes, specifically at Freedom Plaza or in other areas with these designs?
So essentially the concepts, I think the primary thing that we can convey is that the concepts really focus on street circulation, or the circulation of the street, and how that would work. And that does impact or could actually change some of the shape or the size of some of the public spaces. But we have not gotten close to the point of designing those public spaces to know exactly how they would function or what their grade changes might be, or how they might even be finally configured. So the input that we're getting in these early stages is very important. I'll say that we're going to have a lot of needs to balance and a lot of different things to consider, but that is very important. And then we're in this part of our process is to get these initial ideas out there as big ideas so that people can start asking these questions, so that as we move forward, we can consider all the different aspects that we need to look at, much of which has been brought up here in the last few minutes.
Thank you. We have another question from Michael. So to what extent are you dialoguing with other similar projects around the country, such as the Texas Facilities Commission's Capital Complex project, which by clicking on the link looks like it's another streetscape project in Texas?
Karen's done a lot of our background work on some of the precedents we've looked at. Karen, do you want to address some of the areas that we have looked at?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for sending in that example. And that's also very welcome feedback. If there are precedents of, prominent streets or just streets you like, feel free to send them our way. We've done targeted kind of precedent studies in different ways. We've looked at other capital streets around the world, streets with these iconic vistas that function as a ceremonial boulevard. We've looked at Ottawa, Berlin, Paris, kind of those planned cities that have that street, like our Pennsylvania Avenue, where people go to celebrate, to mourn, to protest, with that kind of, the ambiance of a capital street. We've also looked at really good public spaces. For example, Times Square, which is maybe the nation's most iconic public space, but that is such a great example of how it is completely flexible, very amorphous, but it still retains a very protective layer of infrastructure so that people can be safe when they assemble there, when they gather there. It also has an amazing system of utilities. So, when it does come in, like time for those big events, they're basically plug and play. That's something that we're looking at as we consider kind of the avenues public spaces. We've looked at other event spaces, kind of the needs and started to develop kind of a wish list for how to make the avenue a little bit more comfortable and accommodating for people to use it on a day-to-day basis, and also during special events.
Great, thanks, Karen. So another kind of broad question, will this potentially tie into plans to convert portions of downtown into an eco district? Maybe this person is thinking of the linear green concept.
I'll take the first shot at that. Well, we're very familiar with eco districts. I, along with some colleagues of mine at NCPC, worked on the eco district plan in Southwest, which is south of the National Mall. And as we've progressed over the last decade, a lot of these climate related, resilient related, and important best practices on how to improve our resiliency are becoming integrated and more considered just sort of the norm of what we should consider when we're doing new development or redevelopment. So yes, we are. I don't know that it would actually be termed an eco district, but we're definitely, as Karen mentioned, we'll be looking at best water management practices, perhaps even how we might be able to use some spaces or some elements to generate electricity or to generate power. So those definitely will be considered. And if you have, again, as Karen said, if you have any great examples that you've seen around the country, please send them our way. We would really appreciate it.
This might have popped up as a question when we were discussing amenities such as trash, restroom, but maybe it ties in here. This is a question from Andrew. Have you considered implementation of a pneumatic waste collection system?
All things to consider. And waste restrooms, kind of the back of house that, you know, we don't necessarily love to think about when we're talking about events or ceremonial boulevards. That's definitely something that's been on our list. And one of the things, or one of the opportunities here, is really to kind of integrate that stuff to make it maybe less visible, more accessible, more conveniently located. We know a lot of families use the avenue. The avenue is right next to the mall. Those walks can be really long. It's nice to have places to sit, to throw away your trash, and to use the restroom. So it's very much on the list. Again, with these concepts, we're thinking really big picture, but again, we've said as things start to gel into a direction that we move forward with, those details will get hashed out. And we really want the feedback on how you use the avenue, how you'd like to use the avenue. And so we can make sure that all that back of house stuff is there for you.
Great. And if we can circle back to the topic of pilot projects for a minute. Someone is asking, what are the metrics used for success of the pilot projects?
As I mentioned, we're in the early stages of even identifying what those pilot projects might be. We anticipate that they will be something that will perhaps test some of the circulation and transportation ideas that we're putting on the table. And those metrics will definitely be part and included in that process as we identify what type of pilot project that we might be looking at. Because the whole reason of doing the pilot project is to determine what will be successful. And it is of course important to be able to measure that. And we'll need to measure it from all different kinds of metrics. I mean, there's data, there's numbers, there's throughput, but there's also accessibility, equity, circulation efficiencies, and how it might even be usable for, or how we might institute a pilot project and how it will impact all different kinds of uses on the avenue. So how would it affect daily use? How might it affect, being able to hold an event, et cetera. So those are the kinds of things that we will be thinking of, but we don't actually have anything specifically defined quite yet.
Great. We just had another question come in from Prince. Has there been consideration as to who will run the upkeep of the corridor? Will it be the downtown DC bid, the federal government, or will both organizations be involved?
Excellent question. And that is part of that. The update to our plan will be looking at both an implementation and funding plan. That implementation plan essentially will not only be who and how the avenue or these changes might be constructed, but how they would be operated and how they would be maintained and of course funded. Those are all critical, and we need to figure that out before we make any final decisions on what the changes are going to be. Right now, we have been working in partnership with the DC bid. I want to give them a shout out for actually doing some beautification work along the avenue the last few years, of planting some of those beautiful big security pots that line the avenue. It's definitely made those look better, but we'll be working on that implementation plan as we move forward with a preferred concept.
Excellent. So we've arrived at a point where there are no open questions. As I was trying to group prior questions into related topics, I might have missed a few. So if you could help me out, if I did miss a question, please retype it into the chat so that we can address it now.
And I just want to say to everyone, very good questions. Really appreciate the breadth the questions and really all the different topics they cover, and both from conceptual use of the space, but also how it will operate and feel and be implemented.